Seen them? Perhaps. At least something must have alarmed him, for he brought the gun to his shoulder. Beautrelet had fallen on his knees against a tub containing a plant, and he remained quite still, with his heart thumping against his chest. Meanwhile, the silence and the absence of all movement reassured the man. He lowered his weapon, but his head was still turned in the direction of the tub. Terrible minutes passed. 10 minutes, 15. A moonbeam had glided through a window on the staircase, and suddenly Beautrelet became aware that the moonbeam was shifting imperceptibly, and that before 10 more minutes had elapsed, it would be shining full in his face. Great drops of perspiration fell from his forehead on his trembling hands. His anguish was such that he was on the point of getting up and running away. But, remembering that Valméras was there, he sought him with his eyes and was astounded to see him, or rather to imagine him, creeping in the dark, under cover of the statues and plants. He was already at the foot of the stairs, within a few steps of the man. What was he going to do? To pass in spite of all? To go upstairs alone and release the prisoner? But could he pass? Beautrelet no longer saw him, and he had an impression that something was about to take place, something that seemed foreboded also by the silence, which hung heavier, more awful than before. And suddenly, a shadow springing upon the man, the night-light extinguished, the sound of a struggle, Beautrelet ran up. The two bodies had rolled over on the flagstones. He tried to stoop and see, but he heard a hoarse moan, a sigh, and one of the adversaries rose to his feet and seized him by the arm. "Quick, come along!" It was Valméras. They went up 2 stories and came out at the entrance to a corridor covered by a hanging. "To the right," whispered Valméras. "The 4th room on the left." They soon found the door of the room. As they expected, the captive was locked in. It took them half an hour of stifled efforts, of muffled attempts to force open the lock. The door yielded at last. Beautrelet groped his way to the bed. His father was asleep. He woke him gently. "It's Isidore and a friend. Don't be afraid. Get up, not a word." The father dressed himself, but as they were leaving the room, he whispered, "I am not alone in the castle." "Ah, who else? Ganimard? Shears?" "No, at least I have not seen them." "Who then?" "A young girl." "Mademoiselle de Saint Véran, no doubt." "I don't know. I saw her several times at a distance, in the park. And when I lean out of my window, I can see hers. She has made signals to me." "Do you know which is her room?" "Yes, in this passage, the 3rd on the right." "The blue room," murmured Valméras. "It has folding doors. They won't give us so much trouble." One of the 2 leaves very soon gave way. Old Beautrelet undertook to tell the girl. 10 minutes later, he left the room with her and said to his son, "You were right, Mademoiselle de Saint Véran." They all 4 went down the stairs. When they reached the bottom, Valméras stopped and bent over the man. Then, leading them to the terrace room, "He is not dead," he said. "He will live." "Ah," said Beautrelet, with a sigh of relief. "No, fortunately, the blade of my knife bent. The blow is not fatal. Besides, in any case, those rascals deserve no pity." Outside, they were met by the dogs, which accompanied them to the postern. Here, Beautrelet found his 2 friends and the little band left in the park. It was 3 o'clock in the morning. This first victory was not enough to satisfy Beautrelet. As soon as he had comfortably settled his father and Mademoiselle de Saint Véran, he asked them about the people who lived at the castle, and particularly about the habits of Arsène Lupin. He thus learnt that Lupin came only every 3 or 4 days, arriving at night in his motor car and leaving again in the morning. At each of his visits, he called separately upon his 2 prisoners, both of whom agreed in praising his courtesy and his extreme civility. For the moment, he was not at the castle. Apart from him, they had seen no one except an old woman who ruled over the kitchen and the house, and 2 men who kept watch over them by turns and never spoke to them. Subordinates, obviously, to judge by their manners and appearance. 2 accomplices for all that, said Beautrelet in conclusion, or rather 3 with the old woman. It is a bag worth having, and if we lose no time— He jumped on his bicycle, rode to Éguzon, woke up the gendarmerie, set them all going, made them sound the boot and saddle, and returned to Crozant at 8 o'clock, accompanied by the sergeant and 8 gendarmes. 2 of the men were posted beside the gypsy van. 2 others took up their positions outside the postern door. The last 4, commanded by their chief and accompanied by Beautrelet and Valméras, marched to the main entrance of the castle. Too late. The door was wide open. A peasant told them that he had seen a motor car drive out of the castle an hour before. Indeed, the search led to no result. In all probability, the gang had installed themselves there picnic fashion. A few clothes were found, a little linen, some household implements. That was all. What astonished Beautrelet and Valméras more was the disappearance of the wounded man. They could not see the faintest trace of a struggle, not even a drop of blood on the flagstones of the hall. All said, there was no material evidence to prove the fleeting presence of Lupin at the Château de l'Aiguille, and the authorities would have been entitled to challenge the statements of Beautrelet and his father, of Valméras and Mademoiselle de Saint Véran, had they not ended by discovering, in a room next to that occupied by the young girl, some half-dozen exquisite bouquets with Arsène Lupin's card pinned to them, bouquets scorned by her, faded and forgotten. One of them, in addition to the card, contained a letter which Raymonde had not seen. That afternoon, when opened by the examining magistrate, it was found to contain page upon page of prayers, entreaties, promises, threats, despair, all the madness of a love that has encountered nothing but contempt and repulsion. And the letter ended: "I shall come on Tuesday evening, Raymonde. Reflect between now and then. As for me, I will wait no longer. I am resolved on all." Tuesday evening was the evening of the very day on which Beautrelet had released Mademoiselle de Saint Véran from her captivity. The reader will remember the extraordinary explosion of surprise and enthusiasm that resounded throughout the world at the news of that unexpected issue. Mademoiselle de Saint Véran free! The pretty girl whom Lupin coveted, to secure whom he had contrived his most Machiavellian schemes, snatched from his claws. Free also Beautrelet's father, whom Lupin had chosen as a hostage in his extravagant longing for the armistice demanded by the needs of his passion. They were both free, the two prisoners, and the secret of the Hollow Needle was known, published, flung to the four corners of the world. The crowd amused itself with a will. Ballads were sold and sung about the defeated adventurer. Lupin's little love affairs, Arsene's piteous sobs, the love-sick burglar, the pickpocket's lament. They were cried on the boulevards and hummed in the artists' studios. Raymonde, pressed with questions and pursued by interviewers, replied with the most extreme reserve. But there was no denying the letter, or the bouquets of flowers, or any part of the pitiful story. Then and there Lupin, scoffed and jeered at, toppled from his pedestal. And Beautrelet became the popular idol. He had foretold everything, thrown light on everything. The evidence which Mademoiselle de Saint Véran gave before the examining magistrate confirmed, down to the smallest detail, the hypothesis imagined by Isidore. Reality seemed to submit in every point to what he had decreed beforehand. Lupin had found his master. Beautrelet insisted that his father, before returning to his mountains in Savoy, should take a few months' rest in the sunshine, and himself escorted him and Mademoiselle de Saint Véran to the outskirts of Nice, where the Comte de Gesvres and his daughter Suzanne were already settled for the winter. 2 days later, Valméras brought his mother to see his new friends, and they thus composed a little colony grouped around the Villa de Gesvres and watched over day and night by half a dozen men engaged by the Comte. Early in October, Beautrelet, once more the sixth-form pupil, returned to Paris to resume the interrupted course of his studies and to prepare for his examinations. And life began again, calmer this time, and free from incident. What could happen, for that matter? Was the war not over? Lupin, on his side, must have felt this very clearly, must have felt that there was nothing left for him but to resign himself to the accomplished fact. For, one fine day, his two other victims, Ganimard and Holmlock Shears, made their reappearance. Their return to the life of this planet, however, was devoid of any sort of glamour or fascination. An itinerant ragman picked them up on the Quai des Orfèvres, opposite the headquarters of police. Both of them were gagged, bound, and fast asleep. After a week of complete bewilderment, they succeeded in recovering the control of their thought, and told, or rather Ganimard told, for Shears wrapped himself in a fierce and stubborn silence, how they had made a voyage of circumnavigation round the coast of Africa on board the yacht Hirondelle, a voyage combining amusement with instruction, during which they could look upon themselves as free, save for a few hours, which they spent at the bottom of the hold, while the crew went on shore at outlandish ports. As for their landing on the Quai des Orfèvres, they remembered nothing about it, and had probably been asleep for many days before. This liberation of the prisoners was the final confession of defeat. By ceasing to fight, Lupin admitted it without reserve. One incident, moreover, made it still more glaring, which was the engagement of Louis Valméras and Mademoiselle de Saint Véran. In the intimacy created between them by the new conditions under which they lived, the two young people fell in love with each other. Valméras loved Raymond's melancholy charm, and she, wounded by life,